We need to talk about a crisis that's unfolding right now at the very heart of the global energy system. The world's most important artery, the Strait of Hormuz, has effectively been severed. So, what exactly is a maritime choke point? Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like, a narrow bottleneck that's absolutely vital for global shipping. And when it comes to choke points, the Strait of Hormuz is the undisputed king. It's the only way for some of the world's biggest oil and gas producers in the Persian Gulf to get their product out to the open ocean. There is no other way. And its importance is just staggering. Think about this. Roughly 20% of the entire world's daily oil supply, not to mention huge amounts of natural gas, has to squeeze through this one tiny channel. The global economy, our economy, literally runs on the fuel that passes through here every single day. And that gets us to the heart of the problem. That constant, vital flow of energy, it's just stopped. For all intents and purposes, the world's most critical energy choke point is closed for business. No, that's not an exaggeration. The number of ships making their way through the strait right now is zero. A route that normally sees dozens of massive tankers every single day is now completely silent. It's a total and complete shutdown. You can't just take a fifth of the world's oil off the market overnight and not expect some serious consequences. The shockwaves are already slamming into global markets, and they're hitting hard. Oil prices, they've absolutely exploded. We're seeing them surge past $100 a barrel for the first time in 4 years. And look, this isn't just a number on a trader's screen. This means higher prices for everything. Gas for your car, the cost to ship goods. It puts a massive strain on every economy around the world. So how on earth did we get here? How did this scenario, something that people have worried about for decades, actually happen? Well, it all kicked off just a few days ago with a military operation that sent regional tensions into overdrive. The speed of this whole thing was just breathtaking. It started on February 28th with joint U.S.-Israeli airstrikes they called Operation Epic Fury. And in those strikes, something huge happened. Iran's supreme leader was killed. Iran's response was almost immediate: missile attacks on U.S. bases and cities in Israel. By March 2nd, it was official. Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced the strait was closed. So what was the official justification for the initial attack? It came straight from President Trump. He said the operation was all about getting rid of imminent threats and, this is the key part, making sure that Tehran would never, ever be able to get a nuclear weapon. Okay, so that's the military and political backstory. Now, let's pivot and look at how this regional fight is spiraling into a massive, full-blown, global economic crisis. And let's be clear, Iran's closure of the strait isn't just a declaration. They are actively enforcing it. We've seen commercial ships flying flags from all over the world being attacked. It's gotten so bad that a tugboat from the UAE was actually sunk. The message to the shipping world is loud and clear. Trying to pass through here is just not worth the risk. And the fallout goes way beyond just crude oil. Take Europe, for example. A huge amount of their natural gas comes from Qatar, and all of that has to pass through the strait. What happened? Prices almost doubled, basically overnight. It's a perfect example of how interconnected everything is. A problem in one part of the energy market can create a crisis in a totally different one. The reaction around the world has been this cascade of emergency moves. You have the shipping giants Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd just halting all operations. That means producers like Iraq, who have no other way to export, are literally having to shut down their oil wells. Meanwhile, countries like Japan and Pakistan are scrambling for other options, and key suppliers like Qatar are warning they might have to stop all exports. The whole supply chain is just grinding to a halt. Now, you're probably wondering, what about China? They're the biggest energy consumer on the planet. And yeah, they're the single biggest customer for oil coming through Hormuz. But the picture is more complex than you'd think, because China has a really diverse energy supply. Tons of coal, a lot of domestic oil. The oil from the strait only makes up about 6% of their total energy pie. So they have some buffer room, but believe me, a long-term shutdown would still put huge pressure on their economy. So here's a question you're probably asking. Why don't the world's navies just force the strait open? It sounds simple, right? Well, the answer has less to do with military power and a lot more to do with a really fascinating and, frankly, paralyzing fight over international law. It really all boils down to two completely different interpretations of the law of the sea. On one side, you've got most of the world following the UN Convention, or UN Close. It says all ships have a right of transit passage, and you just can't interfere with that. But then you have Iran. They never signed that treaty. They argue for a weaker rule called innocent passage, which they claim gives them the right to block ships if they feel their national security is at risk. So what does all that legal stuff mean on the water? It means Iran hasn't actually declared a formal blockade, because that would be a clear act of war. Instead, they're using military threats and attacks to create what we call a de facto blockade. They get the exact same result, but they do it by operating in this murky legal gray zone. And this quote from the Research and Scientific Innovation Society just hits the nail on the head. Iran is basically using the confusion between the law and military power as a weapon. It's a perfect example of modern hybrid warfare, and it creates a crisis that our legal systems just don't know how to handle. And maybe the scariest part of all this, there seems to be no way out, at least for now. Nobody is talking. Calls for a ceasefire have gone nowhere. Right now, diplomacy has completely and totally stalled. So, with tankers stuck at anchor, financial markets in total chaos, and the diplomats totally silent, the entire world is kind of holding its breath and asking the very same question: what happens next? And the stakes here, they could not be higher. That's a stark warning from Qatar's energy minister, and he's not exaggerating. If the strait stays closed for long, we're not just talking about a regional war. We are talking about something that could trigger a full-on global economic collapse. Which leaves us with this final, massive question. The world is at a fork in the road. Is this the crisis that finally gets nations to unite to restore the flow of energy and defend maritime law? Or are we watching the very first act of a devastating new global conflict, all sparked in the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz?